So in the last session, we saw from what is the target section and what is the task section and what is the variable section, and then how is that you're going to include something called as handlers, so that if you want to trigger some task based on a dependency, how is that you're going to call. So that is what we were trying to understand in the last class. Now, to continue, let's see there are different scenarios that we will be having while running a playbook, and how is that you're going to handle within the playbook. So one of the requirement what we'll be having is, let's say you're having a playbook using which you're trying to do some configuration for a particular machine. And when you're trying to run this, the tasks that you have defined, which will be running inside the playbook, if it is going to take a longer time, then we will not have a control on stopping it, because as soon as you trigger Ansible, whatever the machines that you have specified in the target section, for all the machines, whatever the tasks that you have given, it will be trying to execute it one by one. So that way, now if an operation takes a longer time, then we don't know whether the Ansible is hung, or that particular step where it is trying to run, or the task it is trying to run is hung. So that is when we have such a kind of scenario where if you want to have a control on whether a task is running or not, as well as if you want to run a task in parallel, because now what happens if I have a task. So let's say I'm giving a machine name as group, and then in this group, if I have two machines now and I have one task to do, what will the Ansible do? For each of the task, it will try to run it against the machine. So that's how first the task will be run against machine 1, and then it will be running against machine 2. The same thing, if you have another task, then that task will be run in the same way. So that way, when you have many machines on which you want to run and many tasks you have, rather than running everything in a sequential way, because as of now, the default way Ansible will do is, it will take the task, run on one machine, and after it is completed, the same task, if there is another machine, it will run one after the other. So that way, in case if you want to run all the tasks in parallel on all the machines, so that is when you will be using a option called as running it in a asynchronous mode. Asynchronous mode means running it in the parallel, and at the same time, not just running it in parallel, but if you want to have a track of how exactly it is running and whether it is really hung or not, that can also be done along with the asynchronous mode. So asynchronous way of running Ansible means, rather than running the tasks for all the machines one by one, for the same task, if you have more number of machines, we can run all the tasks in parallel. Okay, so to specify that, for any task that you are defining, you will try to give a keyword called as async. So when you say async, what it will do, by default, rather than running everything one after the other in the sequential mode, it is going to run all the tasks against whatever machines that you are going to give in a parallel mode. But in that, now if you are running all the tasks, we need to know whether this is completed or not, because as of now we will be knowing if it is going in the sequential way. If this task is completed, only then it will go to the next task. So at least we will have a control. But when it is trying to run everything in parallel, this will be getting triggered, and the same time this will also get triggered. So how will we know whether this has completed or not completed? So that is when you're giving the keyword called async, what Ansible will do is, it will run the tasks in parallel, and at the same time you can give a second for this async as a value, where that second is the number of seconds which the task should be running. And in case if it is running beyond the number of seconds that you have specified, then the task will be automatically stopped. So that is how you can keep a control on how long the task should be running. Now let's say if you know that this task is going to run for 5 minutes, then you give a timeout in the async, that is 5 into 60. So give more than 300 seconds. So now if you give the async as 300, then whatever the tasks that it is going to run in parallel, if any one of them is going to run beyond the 300 seconds, then automatically that particular task for the machine will be stopped. So that is how we can have a control when we are trying to run the tasks in parallel using the asynchronous mode. Okay. Now, along with it, we'll also use an option called as poll. What do you mean by poll? Poll means to check and get some data. Especially when we were going through the continuous integration, we use this word, right? Polling a repository means check for the repository if there is any new change. Same way, now when you're actually working on the Ansible, when you have many tasks running in parallel, now if you want to see the status of what exactly it is running, then you can use the additional option called poll. So what will poll do is, the tasks whatever that you are running in parallel, if you give a second, at the interval of that second whatever that you are giving, it will try to poll the output from each of the tasks and it will be showing you. So that is how, now if you say the timeout for async, let's say that you are saying like this, async is 300. That means all the tasks that you're going to run should be running within the 300 seconds. If it runs beyond 300 seconds, it is going to stop it. Now in that, if you give poll as 10, wherein this is the 10-second window within which every 10 seconds it will get the output from this task and this task, so that you can monitor whether it is running or not, or what is the output of it. So that is how you will use the poll option along with async to specify what is the interval of the time in which it has to get the data and show us while it is running for this 300 seconds. Okay, so that is how we will be able to run a command or a task in parallel, as well as you can specify the timeout until which if it runs beyond it, it will be stopped, and automatically you can set a polling where for this regular interval it will try to get the details from each of the tasks it is running in the parallel. Okay, getting it on what is asynchronous mode? Now let's try to see an example on how is that you're going to implement. But pretty much now when you're trying to write a playbook, not all of them will be treated in this way. Only when you want to run the tasks in parallel, as well as if you want to keep a timeout, then we can do. So in the last section, we saw that we will divide the playbook into target section and then task section. And in that, we had given a handler where what we did is we gave a particular task, and for that, whenever it completes, we will specify the notify, so that automatically it is going to call this particular task whenever this is actually completed successfully. So that is what we saw it in the notify and the handler. Now for the same thing, if you want, I can set up the async. So where when you're running this particular task for all the machines that you have which you have specified in the inventory, what it will do is it will first thing run everything in parallel, and when it is running in parallel, it is going to wait for 300 seconds to complete the task. And while it is waiting, in this example, when I say poll is 3, at an interval of 3 seconds, it is going to get the output from each one of them. So that is how when you have bigger tasks to run and many machines to run, you can put a async mode and give the timeout as well as polling, so that at that regular interval it will be trying to fetch the data and it will be showing us. Okay, so this is how you will be giving. Now let's just try to run and see the same. So I'll create a file called async.yaml. Okay, and here I'm giving the host pattern as all. That means we have two groups in our machine, right, that we have defined. One is the demo group and then the local group. So it will try to use both of them. And for that, what is the specific account that you want to use? So let me say the account that we created yesterday. So it is going to use this common account, and it is going to connect to all the machines that we have defined in our inventory. And for that, each machine, it will be running all the things in parallel, and at an interval of 3 seconds, it is going to give us the data. And in that, if any of the task runs beyond the 300 seconds, it will try to stop it. So if I say Ansible playbook, and we call this so you can see that both of the thing is going to be running in parallel. The same thing, the handler task also ran in parallel, but pretty much it ran within the 3 seconds. That is why we were not able to see the output. But in the production, when you're running something, if it is taking an interval of 3 seconds, every 3 seconds it will try to show us the output on the screen, what it is running. And at the same time, if any of the task runs beyond the 300 seconds time that we have given in the async, it will try to stop it. Getting it? On what is the requirement of async mode? Did you guys get that? Hello? Okay. Now, there's something called as run once. So let's say when you have multiple tasks that you want to run in a playbook, okay? And if you give a task, what will happen? For all the machines that you're defining, the same task will be executed for each of the machine that it is going to pick up based on the pattern, correct? So if you have 2 machines, then this task will be executed 2 times with respect to each machine once. That is how it is going to run. But let's say you have some scenario where you want to execute a task, but you don't want to execute it all the times based on how many machines that you have. Instead, if a task has to be executed just only once, then we will be using a concept called as run once. So that is, whenever we have a task which we have to run it only once when we run the playbook. So even though if we have given many machines to be used for that playbook, the task, if you're interested to run only once, then you will specify it using a keyword called run once when you specify the task. So that what it will do, whenever it is running, the first machine that it picks up, it will be running it only once and it will not run twice. For example, here, the same task, we have run it twice for both the machines, correct? Now, if I want to run this only once, then I will add a keyword called as run once true in the task. Okay, so let's try to add it quickly. So here in this, now if I just quickly say, let's say I'll remove this and I'll maintain the indentation, and then we will say run once and the value is true. Okay, and once this is done, if I try to run the same playbook, now you can notice that it is not running on the second machine or the local host. So whatever machine that it picks up, the first machine that it gets is what it is going to use and run only once. If not, what will happen? It will be trying to run it twice. Suppose if I comment it, and when you run now, you can see it is trying to execute for all the machines that you have given. So that is how, by just giving run once as true, it will be trying to pick up whatever the first machine that Ansible gets, and for that it will be running the task only once. So that is how you can run a task only once depending on the need. And that too, in that, let's say out of the list of machines that you have specified, if you want to choose on what machine you want to run that once, here we have two machines which is specified under the all. That way it is trying to use the first machine that it reaches. But instead of this, if you have a specific machine on which you want to run that task only once, then you will use the option or the keyword called as delegate to. So when you say delegate to, now out of all the machines that it has picked up, the specific machine that you have given here is what it will choose to run the task. Okay, so that is how you can specify what is the machine against which the task has to be run once, not something as a random that it picks up. Okay, so let's try to change that also. So here now in this, if I try to add one more, and if I say delegate to and the name of the machine, let's say I'll give it as localhost because I'm not interested to run on the other Murga 2 machine. Okay, and now if you run, what it will do is it will basically, you can see that it is not using it, but it is redirecting it to the localhost. So that is how it is going to use this particular machine to run the particular task that you have given only once, rather than running on both the machines, because by default it is picking up the first machine, but in that we have exclusively told to use the localhost for running the task only once here. So that is how when it has to run this task, it will use this particular machine, and in that it will be running the task only once. Getting it? What do you mean by running once, and how do you specify what machine that you have to pick to run it? Getting it? Hello? Guys, are you following or not? Yes? No? Unless if you don't talk, I'll not be knowing. At least if you're chatting, please reply. Please stop me in case if it's not clear or if you have any doubts. If not, I'll not be knowing it. Okay? Fine. So run once means if you want to run a task only once, and in that also, if you want to specify what is the exact machine on which you want to run, then you will say run once as true, and also you will delegate it to that particular machine so that it will be running the task only once on whatever machines that you have specified. Okay. Now, coming to the concept of loops. What is loop? If you try to understand loop in terms of scripting or programming, loop is nothing but if you have a task and if you want to repeat the same task again and again a number of times, then we call it as a loop. Okay, so when you're trying to write a playbook, then there might be some scenarios where the same task might be ran again and again multiple number of times. So how is that you're going to see? Because first thing what we saw is if you run a playbook, the task will be executed one after the other based on all the machines. And then we saw if I want to run it only once, okay, but the situation what I'm saying is for the same machine, when you want to run a task, rather than running it once, if you want to run it multiple number of times, then we will be using the concept of loop, where let's take an example on creating 10 users. Now let's say you want to create 10 new users for a machine. So that way, when you're creating a task, you will give the task name as the module called user, and in which if you give the username and password, what it will do, it will try to create the user account only once. But now if you want to create 10 accounts, rather than creating 10 separate tasks, what you can do is you can use the loop and you can try to repeat the loop or the same task for different set of values until the number of values that you have given, it has executed everything. So that is how we can make use of loop to run a specific task again and again for different set of values. So that is when, if you have multiple package to be installed, or if you have many user accounts to be created, so those kind of things can be repeated using the concept of loop. Okay, so when you're trying to create a loop, you will be using a keyword called with items, and for that you will be specifying all the values that you have to pick up. So let's say this is one loop. Now this is the task where, what is this task going to do? Here the action I am trying to say is user. User means I am trying to call the module directly, which is going to correspond to creating a user. So if you remember, while we are running the ad hoc command, we saw one module called -m user, using which we were able to create a user account, right? The same thing that we are using, in which what I'm saying is, if you are just running it only once, then you will say username, name, and whatever the name of the account that you want to create, and followed by the state is present, which means it will try to create the account. But since I am interested to run this against a number of users, then you will additionally use a keyword called with items, and each of the value that you have to pass to this loop, you will specify it here using a hyphen. So that now whenever you are trying to run, the first time when you run, it will try to take this value and it will try to assign it to this variable here. So this is the default syntax for the variable, that is the system variable, where now this task attach it to this with items, where we have 3 values for this. So that means this task has to be executed on the same machine against these 3 values. That is what it means. So for each time that you are running this task, it needs to pick up the values correspondingly and run it. So that is how, if you give this item here and along with items, every time when the task runs, the first time it will take this value and it will replace it here. Second, it will take this value and replace. Third, it will take the value and replace. So that is how for each iteration or each loop, it will try to read the value corresponding to what you have given, and it will try to create the specific account in that machine. So that is how for the same machine, the same task will be repeated based on the number of values that you have given in the with items. Okay, so that is what we are going to see. Now let's first check whether we have all these accounts on this machine. Okay, now this is a machine. So in this, if I want to grep for a username called user, then in the etc password, okay, we already have 1 2 3. Okay, maybe we'll check for a user account called test. Okay, there is nothing. So what we will do now is we'll try to create an account called test1, test2, and test3, and let's see how we are going to create it. Okay, so now if I put the same thing into a new file, so let me call it as loop.yaml. Okay, so we are giving this, and now let's try to run this. So if I say Ansible playbook and loop.yaml. Okay, when you enter it, now you can see what is it giving. Okay, it's saying failed to connect using SSH. It's not able to connect. Okay, the account is wrong. June. So now you can see the same task. If you see, it is repeating for all the machines for the different set of values that you have given. So that is how, rather than running the task only once for this machine, with respect to these values that you have, it is trying to run against the machines on each of the value. So that's how you have now 3 plus 3, 6 times that task has been run against each machine 3 times. So now if you go and check this machine, you will see that you have created 3 accounts automatically. Okay, so that is how, whenever you want something to iterate, specifically if you have a task and you want to run the task again and again for a different set of value, then what you will do for that task, you create a keyword called with items, and in that you give whatever the value that it has to use, and each of the value that you want to refer, you will be giving it in the flower brackets called item, so that each iteration, when it picks up a value, it will replace it with this. So that is how you will define that particular item, and wherever you want to use in the task, if you use it specifically for each iteration, it will be trying to overwrite the value of this item with what you are trying to pick up for the iteration. And as soon as the value completes, the iteration will also complete. Getting it? What do we mean by loop? Or what do we mean by iteration, where we can run the same task for multiple values in the same machine? Getting it? Okay, if there are no questions. Now, moving on, conditions. What do you mean by condition? Now, what will happen many times when you have a task that you want to run, it is not mandatory that it should be running always. So, if you want to run a task based on some condition, then you will be using a special scenario where only if the condition is matching, then the task will be executed. So let's take this example. Now we have given this playbook. Okay, this playbook, what was that? Cat async. Okay. Now let's take this playbook. Now, if I run this playbook on different kind of machines, then what will happen? Pretty much this will be running only on the CentOS machine. If I try to run the same thing on, let's say, Ubuntu, then it will not be running, because on a Ubuntu machine, the package that you're going to use is not yum, but you will be using something called as apt-get. So that is how, if you're trying to reuse the same playbook to run against different machines, then you will not be able to run everything. So that is when what you can do is, before executing a task, you can give a condition in the playbook, so that only if the condition is met, then Ansible will be running that particularly on the machine. So that way, conditions are nothing but a specific value that you want to match, and if it is matching, then it will go ahead and execute the task on that machine. If not, we will be able to skip the task whether to run it or not based on whether the condition is matching the value that we have given or not. So that is how you can choose to skip a particular step that you want to not run on a machine by comparing or by giving a condition. Only if that condition matches the value that you have given, it will be working. Okay. And how do you give the condition? So to give the condition, now what we can do is we can use a keyword called when. Okay, and in that you are going to specify what is the condition that you are applying. Now here I have an example in which we are having a task to install Apache, wherein this task, if you see, is going to install Apache on Ubuntu machine because it is using the command or the action called as apt-get. The same thing, now we can also install the Apache on CentOS machine. So if you are using CentOS, then you will be using a module called as yum. Now the difference between this is, suppose let's say I don't give this. Okay, I'm just giving only the task. So I've given two tasks. So what will happen, for whatever machines that you're having, it will be trying to run both of them on that machine. But the problem is, when it tries to run this, it will fail because our machine is not a Ubuntu machine. Hence the apt-get will not be available. Okay, so now here let's create a new file called as conditional. I'll just say cond.yaml, and in this I'll give this. Okay, and now let's try to run this. So if I say Ansible playbook and the name of the YAML file, then now here the first task that it is having is install Apache for Debian, and it is trying to fail because this is not a Debian machine, so it is to use the next one. So this is how, the same thing if you are running it reversely, then when you run the CentOS machine on CentOS, the yum will work but the apt-get will not work. Or if you are running on the Ubuntu, then the apt-get will work, but when it is trying to run the next task, that is this particular task for Red Hat, that will be failing there because you are not running it from a CentOS machine. So these kind of scenarios are where we can give a specific condition. So in this, the condition what we are going to give is here. Now the condition what we are giving here is, we want to check whether the current operating system on which the Ansible is running is Debian or Red Hat. So to do that, you can pretty much give the condition in this way, where if you give a keyword called when, then it is going to consider as a condition, and the condition we are saying is, if the variable called as Ansible OS family, if it is equal to Debian, then allow this to run. Suppose if the variable called Ansible OS family, if that is equal to Red Hat, because if the machine that you're running is CentOS, then it will be matching it as Red Hat. So once this is matching, then if you want to call this task, then it will be calling only if it is matching this value. So that is how, depending on what machine you are running, only that will be running. Suppose if you are running this playbook on CentOS, this condition will fail, because of that it is not going to run this. And next, when it is trying to run the condition, if it is matches, then it is going to execute this only. Okay, so that is how you can specify a condition, and only if a condition is matching or satisfied, then the task will be executed by Ansible automatically. Okay, so let's try the same thing now. So the only difference is for each task we are giving a keyword called when, and that will have a condition where we are trying to check the operating system, what exactly it is, whether it is a Debian or a Red Hat. So you can see currently we are working on the CentOS machine. So now if you want to run the playbook, and if you say Ansible playbook and condition.yaml, then the first thing is it is trying to run. Okay, once again, what's the mistake we have done? Same thing, the user account is not Ansible, it is Ansible June. Okay, so now let's run this. When you're running, you can see now it is trying to skip this particularly. That is because the condition what we have defined is going to check whether the operating system is Debian. In case if it is not, then it will skip this task and it will run only the task on which we have the operating system matching. So in this, the condition is matching because it is a CentOS or a Red Hat machine. So that is how it is going to run only that task. So all the others which are not been matching can be skipped. So only if a condition is matching, then corresponding to it, whatever the task you have given, it will get called. If it is not, then it will not call the task at all. Getting it? Getting it on when do we use a conditional? Now, let's say a scenario where you want to combine both the condition and looping. So that is when you can use an example where we will be using the with items as well as the condition. Now, I have a simple task to do where I'm interested to just run a particular command called echo. So when I say echo, whatever the value that you give, it will be printed on the screen. So that way, now what I want is, I want to print on the screen 02468. So I'm giving it in the with items. So what will happen? Whenever you are running this task, for each of this task, it is going to call the task by calling this echo command, in which you are going to print each of the value by assigning it here. And when you are trying to run, when exactly you have to run? Only when the value of the item that you are going to get is greater than 5. Okay, so only if the condition is matched, then it will be running this. So let's try to add this and see how it is going to work. Okay, so in this we will try to add one more task. So what I'm going to do is, now let me just remove this. Okay, and I'm just adding a task, and let's try to run this. And condition. So you can note that when the condition what I have given is only if the item that the value that you are going to get is greater than 5, then you run. So that way, even though the iteration is happening, it is trying to skip the execution of the task because the value was less than 5. So for all those values which is greater than 5, only then it is going to pick and execute it. Getting it? On how you can combine both the condition as well as the looping, so that depending on your need, you can say how long to run or when to run, or only if a matching condition is there, it will have to run it. Getting it? Okay, so that is about how is that you can give a condition and how is that you can combine conditions and looping together. Coming back to the production thing. So when we are trying to take care of the configuration management as a DevOps engineer, we are not just going to run Ansible, but if someone asks us to help up in the setting up the configuration, what we will do is we will write playbook and we will give it or share it with others so that they can run. But when you are trying to run a playbook, there might be many scenarios where sometimes you might be giving some sensitive data like username or password into the playbook so that it will be connecting to some other tool using some module. So that way, when you have defined all those values, if you are sharing it, now when a user is running this, and along with that, if he opens the file or edits the playbook, he will be seeing all the contents that is inside it. And as we know, it is quite simple to understand what is the structure that is being defined. So that way, now, when we are trying to write a playbook and we do not want others to read the content, then we have a concept called as vault. So vault means, what do you mean by vault? What is vault? Vault means locker, right? So why do we need locker? So if you put something inside the locker with a specific username and password, then unless and until you give a specific password to that locker, you will not be able to open it. So same way, now in Ansible, we can pretty much now create a password for the playbook, and anytime that you want to use the playbook to read it, then you have to give the password and only then you'll be allowed to read. Okay, so that's what we call it as vault. Now to use it, again we will be using a specific binary or executable called as Ansible vault. Okay, so how do we create a playbook? Suppose if you are trying to create a new playbook and along with it you want to try to set some particular password, then you will say Ansible vault create and the name of the playbook. Okay, so now let's say on this machine I'll say Ansible vault create a sample playbook. Okay, and now as soon as you enter, it is going to ask for the password. Okay, then it is trying to edit that particular playbook. Okay, now just let me put some simple message. And in this playbook, if you try to see, it is not showing us the same content because we just added 3 hyphen, but equivalent to that, since we have used the Ansible vault to lock it, it is trying to show the values in some digits. Okay, so this is how whatever the value that you have inside the playbook, you will not be able to access it. Okay, now if you want to use this playbook again, then you have to use the same Ansible vault and we will give the edit option. So this is how what you're going to do is you are trying to edit the sample YAML file using the Ansible vault, where it will first ask us for the password. So if you give the same password what you have given earlier, it will be opening the file in a safe mode where you can try to see the content and modify. So as long as the vault password is applied, if anyone tries to get the data from the file or try to read the file, it will not be allowing to read it. Okay, so that is what edit will do. Now, once you have created the password, if you try to reset the password, then you will use a keyword called as rekey. So when you say rekey and the particular playbook, it will try to change the name of the password that you have set. Okay, so it's the same Ansible vault on the machine name, for which if you just say the rekey, it is going to ask for the existing password, and on top of that it will try to put a new password for it. Okay, now if you try to open this, once again, you have to use the specific password that you have created or rekeyed for that particular machine. Okay, so now only if I give the new password, it will be allowing us to edit the file. If not, we are not going to allow anyone to read the file. Okay, so same thing. Suppose if you want to remove the particular password from a file, then you will use the Ansible vault and you will say decrypt. So the same thing, instead of saying rekey, suppose if I want to remove the password from it, we will say decrypt, and it is going to ask for the password. Once it is done, now if you try to read this file, you can be able to directly read it. So that is how, if you have a particular playbook, you will try to save it by giving a specific password. Okay, and for that we will be using the Ansible vault, so that if anyone is using this particular playbook, they'll not be able to see the content, whereas they'll be able to just run it, not to read anything. Getting it? What do you mean by vault, and what is the scenario on when you will be using the vault? So whenever you want to share your Ansible playbook with someone else, you will be just trying to encrypt it and give, so that they can just run and get the output, but they can never see what you have written inside the playbook. Okay, getting it? What is a vault? Okay, if you have understood, then let's look at another keyword called as include statement. Now, the scenario what we will be having is, let's say when you have a playbook, now when you're writing a task, it could be a same task where you want to use it for different machines. So that way, if a particular task that you have given has to be repetitively used on different playbooks, then rather than writing all the content in all of the playbook, let's say for example, this is the task which I want to use in 2 or 3 more playbooks. So in each of the playbook, rather than giving all the details as duplicating, what you can do is you can use all this common set of tasks which has to be used by all these 3 or whatever playbooks. You will put it separately into a different YAML file, and you will include that YAML file here, so that whatever the contents that you have in that file, it will be expanded. So that is how, now if you have 3 playbooks which you want to use the same task, then simply you can include the file which contains the task, so that all the playbook can use the content from that particular YAML file. Okay, so this is the common necessity, where if you have a particular common task which has to be shared among other playbooks, you can create this common task separately into a file, and that we can include it wherever we want. So that if you use the keyword called include, wherever that you have said include, whatever the content that you have in this file, it will be expanded at that location before running it. Okay, so that's how you will be pretty much trying to combine all the common tasks into a separate file, and you will be including it. Okay, now for example, suppose let's say this condition, Now here, not the condition. Let's take the other one. Yeah, we changed the sample, right? No. Okay, this is just something I created. Let's take async. Now, let's consider if I want to give a particular task into a separate file, then first thing is you will take all the tasks that you want to include. So let's say I want to give everything here. So I will take this completely and let's create a new file. Okay, I'll call that file as include.yaml. Once again, that also has to be a YAML file. And in this, we'll give whatever the task that you want to specify. Okay. And once you have done, the next thing what we are going to do is that file has to be included inside our task. Okay. So what we will do, we will try to use a keyword called include. So if I go to this particular playbook, instead of this, so what we will do, I'm going to include a file. Okay, so when I'm including, I'll give the name of the file which I have to include. So I'll say include.yaml. So this is the one that we have just now created, right? So at this location, when you are running the playbook, Ansible will expand, and whatever that you have given in this file, it will put it up here, and with respect to that, the Ansible will be running everything. So this is how, if you want to use the same task on some other machine, you just go ahead and include it at some location where it has to be expanded. So wherever you are going to include, it is going to expand, and from there, whatever the task that you are given inside it, it will be trying to run it. Okay, so that's how it is going to run. So let's save this, and now let's run this playbook. Okay, so it says that there is a error at line 2, column 13. So what is that? What is the error? Okay, the problem here is I have given the handler section, but inside the file I have not maintained. That's the reason it is trying to give that. Let's remove this handler section. Okay, so I have this, and now if you see the include, now this is the task that we've given, right? So let us try to use this. So let's change this a little bit. I'm going to open, and basically here you can see it is different. So whatever the alignment that you have to do, it has to be on the same line, right? So that is why it was not working. So when it included, basically it included everything, and the syntax was captured on this because everything has to be given on the same indentation. So now if you try to run, you can see it is running. So that is how, wherever that you are trying to specify the include, at that location, whatever the content of the file, it will try to include it at that location. And the syntax error what we had was at this location where the indentation was not followed. Getting it? What do you mean by include? So whenever we have a scenario where there are some common tasks which has to be used on many playbooks, rather than rewriting everything, simply you can put it up into a separate file and use a keyword called include and add it up. Okay. Getting it? Okay. So quickly, I'll talk about one more last topic for today and we'll conclude the session. Okay. So now we saw different things like include and looping. Now we have some concept called tags. What exactly is tag? So when you're trying to run a playbook in which you will be having many tasks. Now, if you are interested to run only a particular task and not everything, then how is that you're going to do? Because as of now, what we saw, either you run all the tasks, wherein if you want, you can just run the task only once, but pretty much when you run, all the tasks will be executed, whether it is going to run it once or many times based on the number of machine. Every task that you have defined is going to be run when the playbook is called. But if you have a scenario where you don't want to run all the particular tasks, but if you want to run only a particular task out of your interest, then you can try to use something called as tag. So what is a tag? If you recall what we have seen in the Git, tag is nothing but a label or a reference that you're giving, right? So that way, now when you have a large playbook, for each of the tasks you can give a tag name, so that whenever you invoke Ansible and a playbook, if you specify a particular tag, only that task associated to the tag will be getting called. So that you can choose what task you have to call and what not you have to call. Okay. Now here is one example where what I've done is basically we have given two tasks. Okay. So in this there is one task which gives the first name and the other task gives the second name. So what is this I'm going to do here is I'm just printing a simple message called Adam and I'm trying to store it in a file. Okay. So practically now if you run this task, it is going to print Adam into a file under the temp log. Same thing, if you are going to call this task, then it is going to print M, which is the second name, and under this file. But if you note, I have added a tag keyword, and for that I have just given a name. So now this particular task has a tag attached to it called first name. The same way, for this particular task, I have a tag name attached called second name. So the purpose of this is, now when you are running this playbook, if you specify to use first name, then Ansible will be running only this task. If you say use only the second name or the tag name called second name, then it is going to run only this task associated to it. So that way, whatever particular task that you tell associated with the tag name, only that will be executed. So how is that you're going to call? When you're calling the Ansible playbook, you will use -- tags and give the name of the tag, so that it will be invoking only that particular task associated to the tag name that you are given. Okay, so let's try that also. Now here I'll create a new file. Okay, so in this I'll try to say tag.yaml. Now in this, what I'm going to do now is simply I'm going to comment this. Okay, just to make sure that these are the two tasks which is there. So when we run this, it will try to run both of them. That is what we are going to do. Okay, so here I'm going to append it so that we will see. So what will happen now when you run this playbook, it will try to run this task first and print Adam into this file, then come here and it will call this task and it will print yum to this, so that when you open this file you will see two lines with one Adam and the second line as yum inside it. So that is the default behavior. And let's say tag.yum. Once again, same mistake. The username. Okay, so it has executed both the task. You can see first name and second name. And with respect to that, if you go to this machine and if you open the file called log, you can see there are two entries in it. Right? Now, what we will do is we will try to add the tag to it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable this tag, and rather than appending, I will just try to overwrite, so that now if I call this task in this file, only Adam will be there, and if I call this task, only yum will be available in that. Okay, so now let's try to call this. So now watch the same thing. If I call this playbook, and now if I use an option called tags and the name of the tag that you want to call. So if I say first name, then it is going to call the task associated with it. Okay, so you can see now it didn't call the second name because you have exclusively told the Ansible to call only this task which is available in the playbook. So it will call only this and it will leave all the other tasks. The same way, if you can now see the output of the log, correspondingly only the first name will be there. The same thing if you call the tag as the second name, then you can see it is going to execute only the second name, not the first task. And with respect to that, if you go here, you can see the second name being printed. Okay, so this is how you can try to specify a tag name attached to a task, and whenever you invoke the Ansible with a specific tag name, only that task associated to it will be invoked. Okay, now you can do something in the reverse. If I say playbook tags and a tag name, what it will do, only the task associated it will get called and none of the other will get called. Correct? Now if you want to do the reverse of this, that is, if I give a name of the tag, it should not call that, but it should call all the other tasks available in your machine, in your playbook. Then instead of tags, you will use a keyword called skip tags. So if you say skip tag and give a tag name, then it will not call this task, and other than this, whatever the task you have, it will be calling everything. So in my case here, if I say skip tags and second name, then other than executing this task, whatever the tasks that we have, it will execute everything. Okay, so let's try the same thing here. So instead of the tags, if I say skip -tags, then other than the second task or the tag attached to it, now what are the other tasks available? The first task. So it is going to execute that. So that is how you can specify the tags and choose whether to run it or whether not to run, depending on the tags or skipping a tag. Okay. Getting it on what do you mean by tags?